I'm Carole Taylor. On this edition of Journal, we open our eyes to the challenges and needs of those living in some of British Columbia's most remote communities. In the past, we've highlighted the crisis in healthcare that many of our cities face every time their local ER is unexpectedly closed, or the maternity ward or the pediatric unit. But just imagine if you lived in a community where there may be limited road access or no access at all. How do you get food supplies, medications, medical attention? Owen Sitnam, a helicopter pilot whose father, Danny Sitnam, founded and built Helijet. He saw a need and he set out to fill it. In 2021, he formed a nonprofit called Helicopters Without Borders to ensure there is a method for marginalized communities and people in distress in BC to access health and wellness services. For Owen, he just didn't believe it. It's not right that there are children in our province who had never seen a dentist or a doctor. So Helicopters Without Borders started to fly in medical and support teams. Imagine being excited to see a dentist. The joy and smiles on the faces of these little ones tells you all you need to know. Last year, they transported health professionals to over 700 clinical sessions, meeting with over 3,000 individuals across BC. By partnering with others, they also support a traveling team of pediatric specialists. And believing food security to be a major issue, they work with charities and food banks across the province, flying in these essentials. We meet the man behind this wonderful initiative, Owen Sitnam, after this short break. Great to see you again, Owen, and I just have such appreciation for the work you're doing. I guess it's a bit of a roller coaster ride when you just start up a new venture like that.
Yeah, it definitely has been. Carole, you know, we're 5 years into it, Helicopters Without Borders, and every day we're learning. You know, I always tell the joke that, you know, probably about 7 years ago, we started to work on the project of Helicopters Without Borders, but met our other co-founder, and we came up with this really cool name, Helicopters Without Borders. But we had no idea what we were going to do. But we knew we had a cool name. And, you know, since then, it's been a big journey of listening and learning from the communities that we work with and we serve to try and get to where we are today. And hopefully we're going in the next few years.
I think most people, especially those of us who live in cities, we don't really understand what happens in these very remote communities. What's it like as you fly around? Yeah,
you know, and that's a really, it's a great point and opener, Carole, because I didn't know what was happening right in our backyard of Canada. So I spent about the last 15 years flying around Canada, fighting fires and doing their ambulance program. And I was over at a fire in Northern Ontario. We took the helicopter over, 2 helicopters to go in. At the time, it was the largest fire in Canada burning. And there was very little resources. We flew to a little community in the north, Summer Beaver there. It was a flying community in the summer because they didn't have their winter road, so only accessible by air. And when I got up there, I had the pleasure of staying with a family in their home. But driving through that community, right in Canada, it felt like we were in a developing country. And I didn't know that was happening in our backyard. You know, that's not happening everywhere, but it's those types of pictures that make us feel that Helicopters Without Borders, we have a mission right in our backyard. Typically when people hear Helicopters Without Borders, they think of an international NGO, but we're born and bred right here.
So in BC, how many of these communities would you say exist?
Well, right now we're serving working with about 10 communities in British Columbia. We operate only in British Columbia. Roughly about 40 to 45 of these extremely remote communities, populations from 50 up to a few thousand there. Those are the remote ones. And then when you go up above 10,000, more on the rural side, obviously it opens up quite a bit more.
And so when you fly in, say it's with one of your mobile clinics, describe what it's like. You come into this remote community and what are you feeling and what are they feeling?
Helicopters Without Borders, we know aviation a bit, but we come in pretty naively to remote and Indigenous healthcare. So everything's been a learning experience for us going into these communities. In the beginning, we didn't know if the idea was going to work. When we bring in these mobile clinics, we bring in the infrastructure right into the communities that we're going to.
So describe the mobile clinic. I've seen your adapted helicopters, but...
Yeah, so years ago, one of the communities that we're working with, one of their top needs was emergent oral health. They needed dentistry. And the community asked us to fly the whole community out to an urban area down to Vancouver to see a dentist. As a small charity, we didn't have the funds to do that, so we started to get creative with the community. It started off by, can you just bring a dentist up here to walk around, talk to people, let them know that people are here and listening to you. We're here to support. But they didn't have infrastructure. There's no x-ray machines up there. There's no compressor units up there. And then the next trip, we asked Dr. Byam out ahead, can you bring a few tools up? And people could just sit in a chair and you can open their mouth, look at them, give some suggestions, say where you need to go.
And some of these kids have never been looked at
ever.
By a dentist ever.
Some of the youth have never seen a dentist. Some of the elders, since residential school, will never go back to a dentist. But that molded into, we started to look and we could get these full mobile flying dental clinics. So today now we have x-ray machines, we have the dental carts, we have the trays, we have the collapsible chairs, the patient chairs that they go into. Those all load up in the helicopter. Within an hour, you have a full state-of-the-art dental clinic set up in the health wing or a school gym, wherever it can be sterilized. And now you can have that service right in the community. Yeah.
What's the worst case you've seen, just talking about dental right now?
As someone who's not a dentist, but I think the saddest stories we see are kind of what I mentioned on some of the elders and their past trauma from dentistry. Extractions that didn't go right, extractions that were not wanted. And listening to some of those stories are pretty hard.
Extractions that weren't wanted?
Yep.
So they're in residential school and they had teeth pulled
out of their mouth. Yeah. I'll tell you one story, so we were up in one of the communities and me and the dentists, because when a helicopter shows up and we say we're showing up with a dental clinic, people don't quite believe it until it happens. Until we're there and they hear the helicopter come in, then slowly people start coming over to the health clinic and seeing it. But me and the dentist were walking around to go and knock on a few doors and just explain what's going on here. And one of the elders that we sat down with, we were sitting there having a coffee, and Cam, our dentist, and he said, are you going to come over and say hello and sit in the seat? And he goes, there's no way I'm coming over to sit in that dental chair. It's not going to happen. And he told us about those stories that happened to him in the past when he was younger. Cam is really good. Cam spoke to him for a while, explained to him, he come over, he goes, no pressure, you just sit in the chair, we'll have a conversation. He said no. The next trip, when we came back, he called and he said, I'd like to come over. I'd like to sit in the chair. And he came over, and he sat there, and they did their preventative cleaning. And that type of impact, you can't really, it's priceless. I know a lot of our donors and individuals, they want to see how many people we can see, but that's a different type of healthcare right there. You're showing up at the pace of the communities when they're ready for it. Yeah.
And so besides dentistry, what's the biggest need?
Right now, we're getting requests for a lot of pediatrics, chronic health. We do a lot of diabetes screening and awareness as well. Nutrition also, nutrition workshops. So those are getting requested quite frequently. But we get a lot of ad hoc suggestions as well. We're kind of, it's a pretty full scope. We have about 30 different individuals from different professions traveling into our partner communities right now.
And so these are full-time professionals
Yep.
from wherever, Vancouver Island, wherever. Yep. And do they set up a schedule that they make themselves available once every couple of months or something?
Yeah, exactly, Carole. So they're full-time individuals. A lot of them have their home base and their clinics that they're working out of, depending on what their specialty is in the Lower Mainland or on the island. But we're getting a lot of these individuals reaching out to us saying they want to be a part of the program. It's hard, the model, when you're going to this type of isolation to communities that don't have roads into them, it can be a 3-day travel time there, which a lot of the clinicians, they don't have time to do that away from their families. And what Helicopters Without Borders does is we turn that travel into 2 hours. So all of a sudden we have clinicians signing up, wanting to go and provide the care and experience it. So they'll take, anywhere from, we'll go out, for example, this week, we'll head out tomorrow and we'll be there until Friday. So 2-night trip there. Some trips are 1 week long that we'll go, but the clinicians, for the most part, we ask them to at least give us about 4 weeks a year, and that also they can commit to about 2 years. We want to build that continuity of care so that the relationship between the clinicians and the individuals in the communities can strengthen and they can build that trust. And
you build this team.
Yeah, to build the team, exactly. Yeah.
And did you say there were about 30 of you?
At Helicopters Without Borders, there's only about 8 or 9 of us on payroll here, and then we got about another 8 volunteers.
We're just going to take a quick break and then we'll be back to talk about the pediatric care that's needed. Owen Sitnam mentioned pediatrics as part of the care that they give through these remote communities. It just breaks your heart to think of a little kid who, whether it's an infection that they can't get rid of or something broken, all up there abandoned. And
yeah.
So how do you handle the pediatric care?
We take our direction, from the community themselves. So if they feel there's a need, we have a few partners in the Lower Mainland and on the island, and we'll organize a special pediatric trip to go up. One of the communities they were going to, there was an undiagnosed child. Mother thought it was autism, so we were able to get a pediatric psychiatrist up to the community to do the diagnosis. And that opens up the door, once they did get it, it opens up the door to a whole range of different services that family can now lean on. And that's just one small bit of the pediatric side that we're doing.
So you partner often to accomplish all these things. And so what's the pediatric group that you partner with?
BC Centre of Ability, and that's been a new partnership. They're focused on pediatrics there. So we've done probably about 3 or 4 trips with them now, and they're focused on occupational therapy and physiotherapy there. And one of the communities right now has had a pretty bad outbreak of lice too. So that same group will go up, and it's every community's a little bit different of what they need. Unfortunately right now, there's no red thread that we can get really good at. We're constantly having to diversify on the specialties and the groups that we partner up with to get there to address the needs for that community.
And also earn their trust, really.
Yeah, Carole, earning their trust has been a massive project. There's so many organizations, great organizations, maybe some not so much, that come in and want to work with the communities, overpromise, underdeliver, and that gets really tiring for the communities. So for us, it was no different. We had to earn that trust. It took us a good few years in the beginning, just that, okay, well, we're going to send a helicopter up here with a helicopter full of team-based care. We'll believe it when we see it, coming this far. So we're getting there, but it's definitely a tough one. It's a project, earn that trust, just because we want to do good, it's not good enough. Yeah.
I would just make the guess that there's a great deal of mental health issues as well. I mean, every city has them, but there are some factors that might exaggerate it in these remote communities.
Yeah. Mental health is something that we get requested quite a bit. We do most of that flying with our partner, the New Channel Tribal Council, over on the island there. One of the challenges that mental health workers, they're very expensive. Sometimes mental health workers, can be as expensive as the transport to get up there. And that's something that Helicopters Without Borders, that we're slowly learning. When we built it and we started to raise awareness, it was for the transport going into these communities. And now we're having to rethink our model and start fundraising for the actual, the individuals that aren't covered underneath insurance, per se, and those will be mental health workers in some cases, yeah.
It's for the specialists.
Yeah, for the specialists.
Does this also lead to addiction issues?
Yeah, I would say, some of the communities that we go to don't deal with addiction as much as others. What I found, and this is just a subjective view, that usually when there's road access into the communities that we go to with road access, that's where the addiction is most prevalent.
Because the drugs get in.
Because the drugs can get in, yeah. In other communities that are maybe fly-in only, it's still there, but I don't see it as much as an issue as some of those other communities that you can drive into. And I saw the same thing when I was fighting fires in Alberta and Ontario. It was the same type of fabric there.
When you mentioned fires, that is part of what you've put into your mission, disaster response. What kind of disasters do you respond to?
In the beginning, the early days of HWB, it seemed like our first year was one after the other. We started and we partnered up with First Nations Health Authority for the delivery of vaccines. So we were delivering vaccines to about 22 of the most remote communities in British Columbia back in 2021. Past that, we had one of the worst fire seasons on record there. Aviation assets across Canada fight fires. There's a lot. There are a lot of aviation assets. So as a nonprofit, so much on fire suppression, that's not what we do. There's a lot of professional aviation companies that do that. But where we come in is more supporting the evacuation stations and the supply to get into these evacuation stations. So, that could bring in bedding, that could bring in sustenance, that could bring in, toothbrushes, everything that you forget about when you leave your home, you no longer have. And that's where we can try and step in to support there, because there's not many assets doing that.
And so that would be fires, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah.
What about floods? Floods
as well.
Is that an issue?
Yeah. 2021 as well, those floods that happened up in the Fraser Canyon. I think, we just started that year, and we had our board set a budget to do 6 flights, I think it was, throughout that year. By the end of the year, we had done 40 flights. I think probably 15 of those were for the floods, flying food into the cutoff communities up the Fraser Valley there. Yeah.
And so food is important, and I mentioned it actually in the intro. Tell me how you get access to the food, whom you partner with.
Yeah. Well, I believe your friend Dan, who was on the show not too long ago with Food Banks BC, we've partnered up with Dan probably for the last 4 years, and their organization has been absolutely fantastic. When you talk about bringing in 3,000 pounds of food into a helicopter, 3,000 pounds of food is expensive and something that we would have to do serious fundraising for. So be able to partner up with someone like Dan Food Banks, Loaves and Fishes on the island, Gordon Foods there, to support remote communities to address the food insecurity problem, that's been massive. Yeah, it's been great.
And are you still doing stuff with Backpack Buddies?
Yeah, we are a little bit. Emily Ann and Joanne in the beginning days, we were doing a lot of projects with them. Food security was one of the number one things that we got requested back during COVID there. Since then, it's not that it's not there, but Helicopters Without Borders, we got to be very careful when we become the food supply chain. As a charity, it's really hard to get donors to commit to multi-year funding. A lot of major gifts come in 1 year at a time. So it makes it hard to build a strategy 5 years out. So if we were to tell the community that we will be the supply chain for food, and we do that, but we don't have funding 1 or 2 years, we can't promise it past then. So what does a community do? Let's say if we lose our funding and Helicopters Without Borders doesn't exist. So that's something that we're very careful with, that we can't take that risk. So we'll deliver food, but it's more of the cherry on top. It's to support the bills of the lower income families inside the communities, to save some of the grocery bills for a few weeks. We do that, but we're not so much the lifeline there for food supply chains. Yeah.
So doing all this good work, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, it's I've been so fortunate to have a great career in aviation, and I love it. And I was always drawn to the social and community side of work in aviation. For me, it was, how can I wake up in the morning and be excited to go to work? And that's why we developed Helicopters Without Borders, was to do a little bit more of that. But at the same time, we're just a business like any other business. And it can be really stressful. Some days you wake up, and I was just telling you, you get this massive imposter syndrome. Like, who am I? Who is our team to be able to do this? I will admit we have the best team, I believe, doing this right now, but it's still, it's question marks. You hope it's going to work out. It's a new model for British Columbia, and you got to take a break. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate your coming, and you'll come back again sometime, but thank you really for the good work.
Yeah, thanks, Carole.
Really appreciate it. Back in a moment. We all get busy with our own lives, whatever our age or circumstance. But in the midst of all this noise, it is important to reach out and ask, what can we do to help someone in need? Big or small, doesn't matter, but the thought does. A big thanks to Owen and his team at Helicopters Without Borders. Let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.